Our message today is, you can do this. We have a tremendous responsibility to help others gather God's sons and daughters, and He's providing resources and tools to accomplish this great latter-day work. Anyone can help. Thus far, we have explained why we are the gatherers and what we are to do. Now we want to discuss some practical aspects about how to do the work. We will demonstrate just a few of the simple no-tech, I like those, and high-tech ways to help people discover and gather family history information and ultimately connect through the ordinances of the temple. Discovery leads to gathering and connecting, but sometimes people become so focused on gathering that they actually make it more complicated than it needs to be. Let's have some fun with a no-tech discovery experience. Elder Bednar, would you be willing to share a little bit about an ancestor that means something special to you? Maybe someone who's influenced you.
I'd be delighted to. This is a story that has a particular place in my heart and has influenced my life in remarkable ways. I want to tell you about Luke Cephas and his wife, Christiana Long. Luke and Christiana learned of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ in England. Each individually found the church, was baptized in the 1840s. They were married on Christmas Day, 1851. Approximately 1 year later, they decided to immigrate to Australia. They sailed on a ship called the Java. The journey was intended to take 3 months. It took 5 months. Christiana had given birth to their first son, Luke, during this journey. Luke only survived for 16 days, and then he was buried at sea. On this journey, they became acquainted with Joseph Ridges and his wife, Adelaide. Now, brother and sister Ridges at that time were not members of the church, and they were impressed by the demeanor and the devotion of Luke and Christiana, especially as they bore the sadness of the passing of their child Luke. Well, when they arrived in Australia, they went about 400 miles north of Sydney. And at that time, there was a gold rush in Australia. And Luke and Joseph decided that they would go into the lumber business. There was a tremendous need for sawed lumber, and so they began this business. Also during this time, Joseph and Adelaide were taught by the missionaries and joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, what's interesting is that as a young man, Joseph Ridges, growing up in London, had learned basic elements of how to build organs. He lived across the street from a facility where organs were produced, and he learned many of the basic principles of building an organ. With some of the wood from their business, he built an organ. And it was intriguing to have the people who would walk down the streets stop and listen to this beautiful music. It was one of the first organs that was constructed in Australia. The leaders of the church asked if that organ could be donated to the church, not in Australia, but in Salt Lake. And in 1857, Luke and his wife Christiana and Joseph and Adelaide immigrated to Salt Lake. The organ which had been built by Joseph in Australia came with them to the Salt Lake Valley. And it was set up in the old adobe tabernacle that sits where today the assembly hall is on Temple Square. Brigham Young was impressed by the beauty of that music and invited Joseph Ridges to design and construct the first the first organ for the tabernacle. Now, this tabernacle, I can't get that straight. This organ is one of the iconic symbols of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today. It's been expanded, renovated, modified many times. But the original core of that tabernacle organ was designed by Joseph Ridges, who learned about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from my great-great-great-grandma and grandpa, Luke Cephas and Christiana Long.
So you recounted this story. Why do you think that is so meaningful? What kind of an influence has that had on you?
When I first learned of that story when I was a little boy, it always struck me that Luke and Christiana, in a very normal and natural way, by living the gospel, were fantastic missionaries. And the very simple things that they did that influenced Joseph and Adelaide produced a result that no one could have foreseen at that time. So, I've always just been impressed by the simplicity of doing missionary work and the long-term impact that it can have in so many lives.
And I testify that since I've known Elder Bednar, he's been a lifelong missionary. It's been amazing to watch him be a wonderful missionary like his forefather. I wanted to ask you another question,
Sure.
too. Do you remember many years ago when we were in Australia and we stood on the shore of the Indian Ocean, we looked at each other and remembered about Luke and Christiana, that we had ties through them, that you did, to the people of Australia. And we felt something then. Now, you just told that story. Surely you felt some things as you were telling this story and recounting it. Could you share with these people in just one or two words what you felt while you were telling the story?
Gratitude, simplicity, and love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, you can clap if you want. Now, it's your turn to participate. Would you each take a moment to identify an ancestor who is important to you? Are you thinking? Hopefully you've identified one. Then, would you turn to the neighbor sitting next to you and take just 1 minute to explain why that ancestor is important to you? We have a time clock that will go for 60 seconds so that this won't get out of hand. But please share with your neighbor about an ancestor that you've identified and why that ancestor is important to you. Are you ready? Okay, time clock. Oh, there's music too. Okay, we're starting to wind down. Thank you. There was a joyous buzz in here just now. Thank you for doing that. Now we'd like the other person who didn't participate and tell about the ancestor to tell something about an ancestor they've thought of to their neighbor. And we have another 60-second clock. Okay. Thank you so much for doing that. Now, do you remember the question I just asked Elder Bednar about what he felt in his heart as he was sharing about his ancestor? Would you just share with your neighbors in one or two words what you felt as you were sharing about your ancestor?
Well done.
Thank you.
Now, typically, these are the important concepts identified by people who participate in this experience. This is called a word cloud. And what you'll see is that the most frequently mentioned topic is the one that is the biggest and more central in the total cloud of the various concepts. This is not occurring here. We didn't somehow have you wired up to know exactly what the words were. But this is what you often will find. Notice how love is in the very center, connectedness, happiness, bond, peace. And notice the connection of these concepts to the fruits of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Now consider also, brothers and sisters, that the spirit of Elijah is the Holy Ghost. It's a specific manifestation of and by the Holy Ghost, bearing witness of the divine nature of the family. Now notice how these very simple conversations, stimulated by inspired questions, can invite our friends and family members onto a path of discovery, giving them an opportunity to act and thereby open their hearts to the power of the Holy Ghost and the spirit of Elijah. The Spirit is essential because gathering is an eternally important work. Now, the discovery experience we just shared is as low-tech as it gets. You can do this. Anyone can do this.
Now I would invite you to think of someone, a family member or someone in your circle of friends, who would benefit from feeling what you just felt. Brother Rockwood talked about this earlier this morning, that we would receive impressions. So follow that inspiration and go and do with your family and friends what you just did with your RootsTech neighbor. You can use this simple approach to discovery in all aspects of the work of salvation. As a ministering sister or brother with a less active family member or member in your ward, or with someone not of our faith, all that is needed is to begin with an inspired question. And you can do this.